Eli Roth is no stranger when it comes to the channel, with me already covering his cannibal exploitation movie, The Green Inferno, that in the process, I would come to learn is actually quite a decisive movie amongst horror fans, with some loving and some absolutely hating the movie. But regardless of feelings towards Eli Roth, one thing is for certain, he likes his movies to get a little bit messy. And an interesting fact about this rather messy film of his is it's apparently based on somewhat of a true story. Sometime during the early 2000s, Eli had been shown a webpage that apparently detailed certain events happening somewhere in Thailand, which involved a criminal organization taking men, women and children and allowing the wealthy elite to hunt them. As horrifically disturbing as something like that may sound, it does certainly set up an interesting premise for a movie, and is said by Eli to be the initial inspiration behind the creation of Hostel. And just like the horrific nature of the inspiration, the movie has gone on to be synonymous with the world of cruel, violent horror movies. A big thank you to Audible for sponsoring today's video. They've asked me to tell you guys about a new Audible original called Impact Winter. From the executive producers of The Walking Dead and the writer of Pacific Rim comes a totally original new saga created just for Audible and Audible's listeners. Presented in immersive 3D audio that dares you to pop in your earbuds and to listen in the dark. In the near future, a comet hits the Earth and blocks out the sun. Beastly creatures begin to emerge in a now sunless world, and they might just be vampires. So give it a go and follow the story of two sisters, Darcy, who is a battle-tested vampire hunter trying to save the world, and Hope, who is desperate for life to return to normal again, which I'm sure most of us listening can relate to given the current climate. Listen to the story and hear how a brave few fight to survive the Impact Winter and fight to live again. So make sure you click the link in the description or type in audible.com/impactwinter now. Hostel begins with two Americans named Paxton and Josh and an Icelandic man named Oli who they'd met on their travels. They found themselves in Amsterdam, looking to experience everything that it has to offer to a trio of young guys looking to party. And after a night of doing exactly that, they come back to realise that they've missed the curfew and have been locked out of their hostel. Luckily for the group, after hearing the commotion that they were stirring up on the streets with the locals, a man sees them and decides to let the trio stay overnight with him. And as they stay with him in his apartment, he learns that the group of young men are looking to party and to meet women on their travels, and he just so happens to have the perfect location for the guys. He suggests that they travel east to a certain hostel located in Slovakia, and according to the man, the women at this place find Americans and foreigners to be completely irresistible, and he promises that it will absolutely be worth their time to go there. So thinking with their heads, and not the ones attached to their necks, that's exactly where the trio head off to the next morning. They board the train and begin to goof off in their usual immature ways, just as a man enters the same carriage and learns where the group are heading. He tells them that they're in for a spectacular time, you can pay to do absolutely anything there, and what they've heard about the women is in fact true. After making the group feel rather uncomfortable by digging into his food with his bare hands, he tells the trio that it's his preferred way of eating. He likes to eat using his hands because it brings him closer to the creature that died for him. It creates a connection between him and the animal, and allows him to appreciate the being that lost its life to satiate his hunger. Right before he then grabs Josh's leg, causing quite the emotional and unpleasant response from Josh, causing the man to get up and leave the men in their carriage. After that rather weird encounter with the meat-eater leg grabber, they arrive at their destination and find themselves in complete shock with how beautiful the place is for being a hostel. While checking into their rooms, they accidentally bump into two women getting dressed, Natalia and Svetlana, who appear to have absolutely no problem with being walked in on, before they then ask the men to come out drinking and dancing with them. And as they're out having a good time, Josh needs to step outside for a moment to get some fresh air. And as he's out there, believing that he's all alone, he's approached by a gang of small children demanding cigarettes and sweets from him. Confused about what exactly is happening right now and why he's being hassled by an army of children, the gropey man from the train steps in and saves Josh by giving the kids some change. Thankful for the man's help, and feeling bad about how he reacted earlier on the train, Josh takes the man back inside and buys him a drink. The night goes on, and the trio of young men continue to drink with the women, before they then decide to head back to the hostel with Natalia and Svetlana, while Oli leaves with another woman. The next morning, as Paxton and Josh wake up, they're surprised to notice that Oli hasn't returned, but brush it off as him more than likely staying at the woman's house he left with. As they're walking around the hostel, they also learn that Kana, another person staying at the same hostel as them, has noticed that her friend hadn't returned the previous night either, right before they receive a rather strange and unnatural text from Oli and Kana's friend. They then receive another one that simply states, "I go home." But as the group are trying to make sense of this bizarre and unnatural series of texts from a guy who they thought they knew better, we learn, in fact, Oli is dead and dismembered, and that Kana's friend is soon about to meet that fate, as she's approached by a man and has her toe removed with a pair of garden shears. Not realizing the true extent of what's happened, they brush everything off as a weird series of events from a rather eccentric Icelandic man they met. That night, once again, Paxton and Josh decide to head out with Natalia and Svetlana again for some drinks. But as they're drinking away, Josh starts to feel unwell and decides to call it a night and head back home, leaving Paxton with the women. But shortly after Josh leaves, Paxton also starts to notice that he's not feeling so great, and as he's on his way to the club's bathroom, he accidentally walks into a supply closet where he finds himself locked in shortly before passing out there for the night. The next morning, after passing out in his hotel bed, Josh wakes up to find himself somewhere rather different to the luxury-looking building that he fell asleep in. It's a dark, damp, dimly lit room, and on either side of him are surgical tools and power tools scattered all around the place in a rather ominous but foreboding way. Whatever's about to happen to him clearly isn't good. As he's freaking out, panicking and calling for help, a man enters the room, covered in head to toe with a protective uniform. It's the meat grabber from the train. Without uttering a single word, the man removes Josh's hood, picks up a power drill, and begins to mercilessly puncture Josh's body over and over again. As Josh screams out in agony, begging for the man to please stop, he sits down next to him and grabs his leg, just as he did on the train a few days earlier, as well as foreshadowing this exact moment by telling Josh you can pay to do whatever you wanted here. He also grabbed his leg in the exact same way where he likes to feel something that has died for him. Josh begs and pleads to be set free, so the man obliges, but not before slicing open each of his Achilles tendons, forcing them to separate from his ankle as he attempts to flee. Josh attempts to crawl away, but the man simply approaches him, grabs him, and kills him. We then see Paxton being rather rudely woken up, albeit not as rudely as Josh was, but an employee finds him in the storeroom and kicks him out, before he returns to the hostel to notice that not only Josh is missing, but also Kana, the woman he met earlier. As he walks into the room, he's struck with a rather strange sense of deja vu, as it's the exact same scenario as how he, Josh and Oli had met Natalia and Svetlana a few days earlier. While walking the streets, confused and searching for his friends, he spots and follows Natalia, where she leads him to a small pub frequented by her and Svetlana. After proceeding to get increasingly irritated at the women's inability to answer his questions, eventually they tell him that Josh is currently attending an art show, and that they'll take him to see it if he wants to. He gets into a car with Natalia and a driver, and that's exactly where they go. The building appears to be some kind of old, run-down, dilapidated warehouse on the outskirts of this town. And after entering the building that looks as if it could crumble at any given moment, Paxton walks down the dark and eerie corridors until he stumbles upon a room where the man from the train is performing some kind of sick and twisted surgery on Josh's deceased corpse. Before he can really react to what he's seeing, he's grabbed by two large men and dragged down a hallway, getting brief glimpses of the unspeakable horrors being committed against fellow human beings. He's taken to a room, restrained to a chair, and forced to sit in the pitch black for an undisclosed amount of time, left there to stew in the fear of what might come next, especially after seeing the things that he had just seen. But eventually a man does enter the room, dressed in the exact same outfit as Josh's rather gropey killer. The man begins to torment Paxton with a pair of scissors, takes a sample of his hair as a souvenir, insinuating that this is not his first time doing this, before deciding to pick up a claw and repeatedly attacking him with it. After a bit of torment, he realizes that Paxton can speak the same language as him and has him gagged and points a gun directly at him. But instead of using that, he decides to savor the events and retrieves a chainsaw instead. The man's about to slice Paxton open, but realizes that he's choking on his own vomit due to the gag. Wanting the satisfaction and the kill for himself, he removes the gag, cuts off two of Paxton's fingers in what appears to be an accident, before slipping over the puke-covered ball gag and falling onto the floor, with the chainsaw landing directly on top of him and cutting through his own leg. Paxton sees the opportunity and uses it to break free from his restraints, grab the gun, and shoot the man through the head. With Paxton now somewhat in control of the situation, he lures the security guard into the room, shoots him too, and takes his keys to free himself properly. He picks up his severed fingers and leaves the room, but he finds himself trapped with no way to leave. So thinking quickly on his feet, he decides to hide amongst a cart of dead victims, just as they're taken away to be processed in the butchering room. He lays there, pretending to be as dead as the bodies he's hiding amongst, and he looks up to see Josh's lifeless body staring blankly back at him with his lips sewn shut. As the butcher is chopping up the body parts and throwing them into the furnace, it gives Paxton a brief chance to slip out and bludgeon the man as he's distracted. Paxton makes his way through the facility, avoiding detection as he goes, and manages to find himself in the room where the killers prepare themselves. And as he looks out of the window, he notices that the police are in on the whole thing. As Paxton puts on a disguise belonging to one of the killers, he finds an elite hunting club card, which displays the rates for each type of victim a person may want. $5,000 for a Russian, $10,000 for a European, and $25,000 for an American. He's found himself in a facility designed for the ultra-wealthy to savagely take as many lives as they could possibly want, just as long as their bank account is big enough. A man belonging to the club enters the room, but believing Paxton to be another paying client just as he is, the man gets to talking. He's full to the brim with energy and visibly excited at the prospect of taking another human being's life. He discusses the subject in such a way that you'd be easily mistaken for thinking that he was just talking passionately about his favourite sports team or his favourite thing to do after work. It just so happens to be that his favourite thing to do is to take the life of an innocent helpless victim who's done absolutely nothing wrong. After the man goes, Paxton takes a gun and is about to steal a car and leave, but stops dead in his tracks as he can hear the terrified screams of Kana coming back from the warehouse. Instead of choosing to just save himself from this absolutely horrific nightmare, with that opportunity standing right in front of him staring him in the face, he turns around, runs back into the building and shoots the man dead. But as he approaches Kana, he finds her with one of her eyeballs dangling out of her socket, and for some reason decides that the best course of action right now is to take a pair of scissors and to cut it from her face. They sneak out of the facility and into a car, before speeding off as the other members of the organization notice them fleeing and follow in pursuit. After arriving back in town, he's forced to a standstill as a truck is parked in their way, but as it eventually moves, he notices not only Natalia and Svetlana ahead, but also the guy back in Amsterdam who sent him and his friends all the way to this hostel. So he does what any reasonable and sane person would do in this situation. He floors it, running all three of them down in the process. Natalia survives the initial impact, but as she's slowly getting up, she's mercilessly run down by the men pursuing Paxton, as if she was nothing more than a mere ant in their way. Paxton finds his path blocked once again, but this time by the local kids who terrorize the streets. Noticing a bag of gum left in the car previously used by Natalia, he gives it to the kids and has them block in his pursuers, before they proceed to pelt the men with rocks and kill them in the process. Paxton and Kana manage to make it to the train station without incident, but as they're sneaking their way around, Kana spots the reflection of her face in a sign and decides to slowly walk in front of an oncoming train, showering all the locals with a burst of blood and guts. This rather unfortunate event happens to give Paxton the distraction that he needed, as there's already men at the train station looking for him, and as he's sitting on the train laying low, he hears the exact same speech being given about how I prefer to eat my food with my hands. Realizing exactly who it is, Paxton decides to wait for the train to stop, and after it does, he sees with his own eyes it's the same man from earlier who killed Josh, meeting up with his young daughter. Paxton waits for the man to enter the train station restroom, and as the man emerges, he realizes that his daughter is now gone. And rather anticlimactically, the movie comes to an end, with Paxton on a different train with the girl, covering her mouth to muffle her screams. And if you think that's an incredibly out of place and rather strange ending, considering Paxton is the type of guy to head back into a warehouse full of torturers to save somebody he barely knows, and not kidnap little girls, well, you're in luck, as there's actually two different endings to the movie. The other, much more fitting ending, plays out with Paxton following the man into the restroom, cutting off two of his fingers, just as Paxton has lost two of his, drowning him in the man's own toilet water, before pulling his head out and cutting open his throat. And there we have it. Everything is as it should be. And before this video comes to an end, I'd like to announce that my clothing brand is now live, so make sure to head to the link in the description to check that out. Also, in a typical YouTuber fashion, make sure to follow all my socials, my Twitter and Instagram in the descriptions as well. That way you can keep up to date with new videos that are coming out and other interesting projects as well. So before we finish, I'd like to quickly thank my patrons. A big thank you to Dom, Hunters263, Rebecca Pitts, A Dandy in Space, Martin Brannan, Natasha Twyman, Rinand Whiskey, Jared CBs, Nicholas, Pascal Mathis, Fighting the Pirates, Richard McGowan III, Macy J, Reese Harford, Horatio, Jamie Thompson, Raimi Patterson, Chris, Michelle, Newcomb, Dennis, Wade Knott, Ike, Mr. J2, Monopogy, Ashley L. Wintz, Austin Weipert, Christopher Butsky, and Jack the Riddler. Thank you so much to my patrons, and thank you to everyone else for watching.